It's Wednesday, the 22nd of February. Shamima Begum expected to find out later whether she's won an appeal against the decision to strip her British citizenship for joining the so-called Islamic State in Syria. Signs of a breakthrough. Nurses begin new intensive talks with the Health Secretary this morning.
The Royal College of Nursing pauses its planned strikes as the head of the union says she's confident of negotiating a fair deal on pay.
President Biden promises support for Ukraine will not waver as Vladimir Putin prepares for a major rally in Moscow.
After Russia's latest nuclear warning, the US President Joe Biden is due to meet with NATO allies from the East later today.
The DUP says there are still issues to be resolved as the Prime Minister tries to get a new deal on post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland over the line. Morrison's joins Asda in limiting the sale of some fruit and veg from today, with a warning the shortages could last for weeks.
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
A new customer survey reveals the worst short-haul airlines for British passengers. Morning everybody. Shamima Begum is due to find out later on today if she's won an appeal against the government's decision to strip her of her British citizenship. Ms Begum was 15 years old when she and two other schoolgirls from East London travelled to Syria to join the so-called Islamic State. She had her British citizenship revoked on national security grounds by the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid shortly after she was found in a refugee camp in 2019. The Home Office has argued that she remains a threat to national security, while her lawyers have argued she was a victim of child trafficking and is now de facto stateless. Let's take you through what happened. February 2015, Shamima Begum and two other girls left their homes in East London and flew to Turkey, from where they travelled on to Syria. 4 years later, after the fall of IS, she was found by a Times journalist 9 months pregnant in a refugee camp in northeast Syria. She told Sky News at the time that she wanted to come home, but didn't regret her decision to join the terrorist group. Later that month, in February 2019, the UK government served notice that it intended to strip Ms Begum of her citizenship on national security grounds. They said that because of her parents being a Bangladeshi, she could apply to go there instead. In 2020, the Court of Appeal ruled that the only way she could have her case heard fairly was if she was permitted to come to the UK, but that was immediately challenged by the government. Her return was blocked by the Supreme Court, with the Home Office continuing to argue that she posed significant national security risks. Ms Begum told Sky News that she had never been involved in any atrocities. And then, last November, her latest attempt to win the right to travel back to the UK began in London. That's expected to conclude later this morning.
The consequence of today will not mean that Shamima Begum would be brought back, because the British government is refusing to bring back the large majority of the adults who are detained in northeast Syria. What it will mean is that for the first time, a court will be saying that the Home Secretary erred when they made their decision to strip her of her citizenship.
Here we go. Tamara's here. So, what happens today?
So today we learn whether she's won her appeal against the decision that she's not allowed to return to the UK, that latest decision in November. This is the latest twist, as you were hearing, of this long-running legal battle that's been raging since the former Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, revoked Shamima Begum's citizenship back in 2019. She initially appealed on the grounds that she was made stateless, but a tribunal found in the government's favour on that, saying that she could have access to Bangladeshi citizenship. She then appealed back in November on the grounds that she had been trafficked to Syria, and her lawyers said she was recruited, transported, transferred and harboured in Syria for the purposes of sexual exploitation and marriage to an adult male. Now, the government's position is that the fact that she was 15 and the fact that she may have been radicalised online was all considered in the decision to revoke her citizenship, and that people trafficked to Syria can still be a national security risk and they still still believe she is a national security risk. So we'll hear about the results of that. This is all being heard by a Special Immigration Appeals Commission. That's a tribunal where basically the secret services can give evidence covertly. And Mr Justice Jay is due to rule on that appeal this morning, but she has not been very successful in her legal actions so far, and it would seem that she may be running out of road.
Yeah, what happens if she loses this one? Do we know yet?
If she loses this one on the latest grounds, it's not clear that she has many other options, and that even if a court did find in her favour, how would she end up coming back to the UK, because the British government is not going to facilitate that happening.
Well, and just a thought about Sajid Javid. He was the one that decided when he was Home Secretary that she couldn't be a British citizen anymore. He said, subsequently he said, if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't want her in this country. Will we ever know what he knew?
Well, it doesn't look like it at the moment. The government's position is that although many other countries have taken back a lot of the people who joined Islamic State, and the British government has been criticised for not doing so, for not bringing them back, putting them on trial, the government's position is that a lot of this evidence could not be heard in an open court, and a lot of the evidence couldn't be gathered because it comes from Syria. So the government have been criticised for letting people essentially rot in refugee camps in Syria, former Islamic State fighters. And the decision to strip her of her citizenship on the grounds that she could have the citizenship of another country, although she doesn't actually have Bangladeshi citizenship, does have implications for other people in a similar situation.
OK, Vinay, thank you. Thanks a lot. The head of the Nurses Union says she's confident about negotiating a fair pay deal as they enter what are being described as intensive talks with the government this morning. The Royal College of Nursing has agreed to pause their next major strike while talks are ongoing, which had been planned to run 48 hours from the 1st of March.
We certainly will, as we've always said, we will put our plans on the table. They can put their plans on the table, but I'm confident that we will come out with a fair pay settlement for our nursing staff.
Becky standing by for us this morning at the Department of Health. So nurses are a special case, are they?
Sorry, Kay, just repeat that again. I didn't catch that.
No problem at all, Becky. I was just saying, it seems like nurses are going to be considered as a special case.
Well, perhaps, Kay, and certainly other unions will be looking on and watching closely what happens here. Some might be unhappy that nurses perhaps are being treated as a special case, but also it could be the breakthrough that we need here in these talks between unions and the government. In terms of nurses, the big sticking point so far has been that the government has not been willing to talk about a further pay rise for this pay year, which actually ends in March. The fact that these talks are happening at all would suggest they have some flexibility on that. They also, of course, need to talk about next year's pay rise. The government has said that 3.5% would be an affordable amount to raise NHS pay by. Perhaps they are flexible on that too, especially after the news yesterday that public borrowing is way down. Could that mean more money for public sector workers? We shall have to wait and see. But certainly a step in the right direction, these talks between nurses and the government. As you mentioned, nurses have called off that 48-hour strike that would have included emergency workers. Good news for patients and NHS leaders. But the big question here is, will these talks today set the bar for other talks between unions and the government? The government needs to end this wave of industrial action. Will their talks with nurses be a step towards that?
OK, Vinay, thank you. And a 72-hour strike by ambulance workers enters its final day today. Ambulance staff belonging to the Unite Union in Wales and the North West region of England are taking industrial action over pay. Unite has also announced 2 further strikes in Wales in March. It's calling on the Welsh Government to do the right thing and get around the table. Meanwhile, the head of a teachers' union has said they won't call off their strikes after the Education Secretary invited unions to engage in formal talks on pay, conditions and reform. In response to Gillian Keegan's request, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, Kevin Courtney, said the NEU is pleased that the Secretary of State has agreed with the Prime Minister and Chancellor to move into substantive formal talks with the NEU to end the dispute between us. Our dispute is about seeking pay increases for teachers, which at least match increases, and for any pay rises to be fully funded in school budgets. We are willing to talk at any time, but there is nothing substantial in the Secretary of State's letter that suggests to us we should call off strikes for next week. Joe Biden will meet Eastern NATO leaders today in a show of support after the Russian president suspended a nuclear arms control treaty. Vladimir Putin also accused the US of turning Ukraine's war into a global conflict. In his own major address yesterday, the US president declared that Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Well, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes is in Kyiv for us this morning. Just a day or so away now from the anniversary of the start of the war, as the snow begins to fall again where you are. What is the view of what these two big hitters are saying in the middle there in Ukraine?
Well, we've literally just had some more air raid sirens here. It's quite haunting, really, because I remember being here on the 24th of February when the full-scale invasion started and hearing that sound for the first time. Almost exactly a year later, it's become part, unfortunately, of normal life. Obviously, people here keep carrying on, really, when you hear the sirens. But over the last few months, there have been significant missile strikes, including in the capital city, which really underlines that when you hear those sirens, Russia's war effort is continuing. It's raging in the east still, where the front line is being fiercely contested, especially around that city of Bakhmut. There's expectations that both sides will be seeking to launch some kind of new offensives. The Russians have seemingly been trying to ramp up the amount of artillery fire that they're launching against these Ukrainian positions to try to push forward, throwing waves as well of Wagner mercenaries against the Ukrainian lines. But the Ukrainians have been managing to hold firm, but both sides incurring horrendous losses. So yes, while you have these two leaders, Joe Biden, who came here for the first time since the full-scale invasion a couple of days ago on a hugely significant moment, him speaking, and then also the Russian president speaking, caught in the middle here, the country that really is at the heart of all this, Ukraine. The war shows no end in sight.
OK, for now, thank you. At 9:30, the Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis will be here to talk about what he thinks lays ahead for the war in Ukraine. Now, despite ongoing discussions, there's still no deal for the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak has said that Britain and the EU have an understanding on what needs to be done around the Northern Ireland Protocol, but that work still needs to be done. OK. I don't know, do you understand the Northern Ireland Protocol? Do you understand what's happening in Northern Ireland? How can they resolve it? The man who does know, of course, our Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, chief correspondent, forgive me. How do they fix it?
Well, squaring that circle won't be easy because there has to be a border somewhere as a result of Brexit, either on the island of Ireland, and many people feel that contravenes the Good Friday Agreement, making it very clear that there's a division again between the North and the Republic, or it has to be in the Irish Sea, which clearly, in the view of unionists, draws a line down the middle of the UK. And so the Prime Minister is struggling, it seems now, to get this deal over the line because he's under pressure, both from the ERG, the hardline Brexiteer wing of the Tory party, and from the Democratic Unionists. But what they often forget, of course, is that it was Boris Johnson who signed up to this deal with the EU in order to, in his own words, get Brexit done, despite having repeatedly promised the DUP that there would be no border in the Irish Sea. That's what he had to say when he attended the party's conference back in 2018.
We will under no circumstances have a hard border. There will be no physical checks or infrastructure at the border in Northern Ireland.
No British Conservative government could or should sign up to any such arrangement.
We're a UK government. Why would we put checks on goods going from NI to GB or GB to NI? It doesn't make sense.
So he was the man who did the deal with the EU, but of course immediately...
Oven-ready deal.
Yes, oven-ready deal, but the DUP immediately felt they'd been thrown onto the bus, so to speak, and they regard this deal as a problem because it raises the question of where Northern Ireland's future lies. They believe it creates a compromise in Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. Even though it's just a trade deal, it creates an economic United Ireland, which of course in their view paves the way to a political United Ireland. And that's why they want this deal scrapped. And although Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, leader of the DUP, says Rishi Sunak has made some progress, the DUP and the ERG met last night, and the DUP said they were still elements of the reported deal, although they haven't seen the detail yet, that they're not happy with, particularly the role of the European Court of Justice, because it would continue to have jurisdiction over trade disputes in Northern Ireland, but of course because of Brexit it no longer has jurisdiction over any other part of the United Kingdom.
Will a deal ever be done?
That is a good question, but Northern Ireland desperately needs a deal to be done because the DUP are currently boycotting, power sharing, the administration at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement. So Northern Ireland, like everywhere else in the United Kingdom, is dealing with a cost of living crisis, a healthcare crisis, an energy crisis. But there's no one in office to address these things. They're being sort of handled at arm's length by the Northern Ireland Secretary and his team in London. But if there is no deal, effectively power sharing is over. The Good Friday Agreement is dead. In the 25th anniversary year of the Good Friday Agreement, that would be extraordinary. And what happens next? Things have changed a lot in the last 25 years. Unionists are not the dominant force. There's a nationalist Sinn Féin First Minister designate standing by, ready to take office if she's ever given the opportunity to do that. So the suggestion that we would simply revert back to direct rule from Westminster, I don't think is feasible. There's no legislative provision for it any longer.
And potentially Sinn Féin could also be in charge in Ireland.
That is right. They're doing very well in the polls. Mary Lou MacDonald, who I know was on the programme talking to you recently, is, in the view of many people, poised to become the first Sinn Féin Taoiseach in the next general election. Whether or not that happens, well, there's still a possibility you could have Sinn Féin in office as Prime Minister in the Republic of Ireland, as First Minister in Northern Ireland. If that's not an indication that things have dramatically changed in the last 25 years, Kay, I don't know what is. OK,
and you've got a surprise interview that you can't tell us about, but it's tomorrow, and everybody's going to want to hear what your guest has to say, but I'm not going to say any more than that. Thanks very much indeed, David. Thank you. And a reminder that Prime Minister's Questions is on today at 12 noon. We'll be bringing that to you live here on Sky News. Looking at some of the day's other news for you now. And Morrison's is joining Asda today to introduce limits on purchases of some fruits and vegetables. There's a warning that the shortage of tomatoes, peppers and other produce is likely to last for several weeks. A combination of bad weather and transport problems in southern Europe and North Africa is blamed for bare shelves, with some supermarkets rationing produce sales. The Environment Secretary, Therese Coffey, plans to address food security when she gives a speech to farmers later on today. Unions believe an announcement could be made as soon as today about potential job losses at British Steel's site in Scunthorpe. They say they were told earlier this month that the Chinese-owned company was considering closing coke ovens. Sky News understands that the UK government officials will fly to China this week, hoping to secure a state funding package worth as much as £300 million. A report out of the Lords predicts the government will miss its targets to switch people from gas boilers to heat pumps. Ministers want the greener, cheaper heating technology put into 600,000 homes every year by 2028. The Environment and Climate Change Committee say despite household grants, the take-up rate is still too low. Joining us now, Minister for Veterans Affairs, Johnny Mercer. Hi. Good
Hi,
to
Kay.
see you.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for joining us. I don't think you've been on the sofa when I've been in previously, so it's nice to see you. Thanks for coming in. What are we going to do about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the impasse that has been created?
Look, I think it's clear the Northern Ireland Protocol doesn't work for any sides in Northern Ireland, and the Prime Minister's doing everything he can to resolve that and get to a solution that preserves the Good Friday Agreement and make sure that there's the free flow of trade in Northern Ireland. That's been going on for some time, I think, and we're looking forward to resolving that and getting on and realising all the benefits of Brexit.
How are you going to resolve it?
Well, look, the Prime Minister's in negotiations at the moment, isn't he? And, you know, he had good discussions last week with the European Union. He's got good engagement going on at the moment with other MPs and, you know, we'll see what comes out of this.
Yeah, but because of Brexit, there has to be a border somewhere. Boris Johnson has said time and time again, ERG saying the same thing, that there cannot be a border in the Irish Sea. So that would mean there'd have to be a border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, and that would be against the Good Friday Agreement. So where does that leave you?
So, Kay, obviously, I mean, it feels like we're stuck in a time warp, doesn't it? Because we're talking about the same things that we've been talking about for 4 or 5 years. Let's give the Prime Minister a chance to come out with something, right? He's attacking this. He is throwing everything he can into it. He voted for and campaigned hard for Brexit, right? So he's not going to sell anyone out or come up with a solution that's unfair or doesn't deliver on what he thinks is Brexit. I think let's give him a chance, give him the opportunity to bring some sort of resolution to the protocol, and then let's get behind him and get on with all the other challenges that we face across this country at the moment.
A deal this week?
I don't know, I hope so, but let's see what happens. You know, he's working hard and let's see what happens.
Talk to me about your brief. You're announcing new money for projects helping veterans. Tell me more.
Yeah, so look, the Health Innovation Fund we're launching today. We, you know, clearly we're on a drive to make this the best country in the world to be a veteran. There are some veterans who will wake up this morning with really difficult wounds that still don't heal and really, you know, bed sores and pressure sores and things like that. And we're investing £5 million in technology companies and other companies across the UK, 22 different companies, looking at really innovative and, you know, exciting technologies that will help people improve and heal their wounds. You know, I was at a company yesterday that looked at electronic plasters, right, where you can, you know, put these plasters on people who've had amputations and so on and pass a current through them and actually start to heal some of these wounds that haven't healed for such a long time. So, look, it's really exciting, except it's niche, right? But I think the way the country looks after veterans is a big marker by which we should be judged. I think that's fundamentally changed under this government. And, you know, it's another waypoint on the way to making this the best country in the world to be a veteran.
You have championed the Troubles Legacy Bill. You seem to be the only person that does. Why are you continuing to plough on with it?
Well, I don't think I am the only person who does. I think, obviously, the airways will be dominated by people who don't like it, which is
opposed by all parties in Northern Ireland, the Irish government and the...
Yeah, of course, and it's going to be, right? And if they were happy with it, I don't think we'd hear anything about it. The Troubles Legacy Bill in Northern Ireland is incredibly difficult, right? It's incredibly sensitive. You're dealing with really, really difficult issues that have reared their heads over the last 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement. I think it's pretty clear that what has happened, and you've seen this over the course of the last year, is not fair. It's not fair on anyone. It's not delivering outcomes for victims. It's not delivering fairness for veterans. And, you know, the government was elected on a manifesto promise to bring that to a close and bring some sort of reconciliation and resolution for victims in this space. And, you know, the government should be commended for that. It's not easy, right? Solving what has happened in Northern Ireland and dealing with legacy is not easy. You can't just throw slogans at it and say, you know, we're going to open up the books or protect it. It doesn't work like that. Legacy is really, really difficult. And if you're really committed to helping the victims understand what has happened, then you would support this bill and sort of encourage the transparency that it presents. And the Northern Ireland Secretary has done a great job in bringing communities with him in Northern Ireland. Obviously, I totally accept that everyone is against this, and I understand in Northern Ireland, and I respect that. You know, that is their job, and they represent particular parts of the population in Northern Ireland. I don't think it's the wrong thing to do.
Say again? That's because it offers an amnesty.
Yeah, but there is no way. It doesn't offer an amnesty, right? First up, it's not an amnesty. People who think it's an amnesty don't know what an amnesty is. Secondarily, you know, that you cannot have laws that disaggregate between claimants, between those who served in the military and those who didn't. So, look, we have to operate in the real world. We have to operate with the world as we see it. Is it where we, you know, a solution that you know, we all want to see? Well, look, I don't think you're going to get that in legacy. I think some of these crimes, the evidence just doesn't exist anymore. And we have a duty to make sure that existing structures are not abused and, you know, by one side or the other, and that we try and deliver fairness for victims in this space, and at the same time not allow the abuse of our veterans.
Talk to me about Shamima Begum. Should she be allowed to return to the UK?
Look, I think there's a lot of information in this space with her that has not been made public. You know, Sajid Javid, when he was Home Secretary, he made he made his decision around that, and I support him in that. I think that case is going through the courts today. Let's see what they say. But look, it's in spaces like this with national security, there is so much information that is not in the public domain, and you have to trust the processes and trust the Secretary of State, like Sajid when he made that decision, and the courts to make sure that we come to the right conclusion. I'm sure she'll be treated fairly.
She's only 15 when all this happened. She was a kid. She was groomed.
You know, that's something the court will take into consideration. That's, you know, that's not for me.
And can we not put her on trial? I mean, is it not a place where we can put?
But again, but they are working through all these questions in the court and clearly in the Home Office. Look, I don't have a view because I'm not
sure you do.
cited on all the high side intelligence around her. You know, clearly if she's a threat to this country, then you know, we have a job to keep people safe, and that's what the government's determined to do and will do.
What's your view on nurses being a special case when it comes to pay rewards?
Look, I think the strikes are really unfortunate. There's a lot of people in Plymouth who work in the public sector. I will always argue for them to get paid more, but you know, you're chasing a really difficult problem here. The biggest challenge is inflation, and that is driving up prices across Plymouth and across the country. And you know, people like the Governor of the Bank of England himself have said that, you know, if you continue to chase that with pay rises, you're never going to end it. So I don't think this is a binary issue that you can, you know, say well the right thing to do is. I think these negotiations need to continue. People are negotiating in good faith, and we'll get to the end of it. Look, I think you can argue there's a special case for lots of different professions like that, junior doctors and so on. I think you know, I think these negotiations need to be conducted in good faith, and I think we need to bring these strikes to an end because there's enormous pressure on health services. People in my constituency want to see their health services working properly, and these strikes and withdrawing of labour only makes that more difficult.
OK, just before I let you go, we both know that you're the king of reality TV. Do you fancy following in Matt Hancock's footsteps?
No.
Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Overnight, cloud and rain will be slow to clear southern parts, but for much of the country, there'll be a much cooler feel to the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's have a look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The right half of the screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced. Always watch out for the coal, don't we? And it's down below 0.5% at the moment. On the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now than it was in 1880. It's gone up to 1.26 degrees warmer. You need to keep an eye on that. If it goes to 2, we're in a lot of trouble. Total CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes in real time is to the bottom left. Still to come on the programme, we'll tell you the short-haul airline that has been given the lowest consumer satisfaction rating by Consumer Group. Which? That to come. The Consumer Group, which has put out its rankings of short-haul airlines based on consumer and customer satisfaction. Thousands of passengers were surveyed about things like boarding experience, cabin environment and how comfy the seats are. Well, we'll start with the third from bottom. That is Eurowings overall, which gave it a score of 53%. It was just ahead of Ryanair, the biggest name in short-haul flights. They managed 52%. And at the bottom of the pack is Hungary's Wizz Air, 48%. It scored just 1 or 2 stars in all key categories, including value for money and cleanliness. In its defence, Wizz Air spokesman said they do everything possible to get passengers to where they're going without delay. And I did fly with them to Moldova a couple of weeks ago, and they certainly got us there on time. So I can agree, certainly on that bit. Lots of speculation about how close the government is to securing a new deal to fix post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland. Joined now by the Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex and the Liaison Committee Chair, Sir Bernard Jenkins. Hello to you, Sir Bernard. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning.
Thank you. Sorry I can't be in your studio today.
Yeah, me too. Hopefully you'll come again very soon. Always welcome. How close are we, do you think, to a deal?
Well, I fear not very close, because what's been happening is the government has been strenuously trying to reach an agreement, but within very narrow confines that the EU has set. They won't consider reopening their mandate to look at new ways of approaching the whole question of Northern Ireland in post-Brexit. And the consequence is that the negotiations have been on a very narrow mandate set by the EU. And it doesn't look as though the government can resolve the power sharing crisis with any deal that will emerge from these negotiations.
OK, so Brexit means there has to be a border somewhere. Where should that border be?
Well, the border is actually the border that people mind about, that the EU minds most about, is the north-south border. All the discussions in this negotiation have been about how to stop non-compliant goods getting into the Republic of Ireland. And to that extent, the border's in the wrong place. And the border was put in the Irish Sea to try and avoid offending one community in Northern Ireland, and it finished up deeply offending another community in Northern Ireland. And you'll remember, Kay, during the negotiations, there was lots of talk about what they called alternative arrangements, of having some kind of invisible north-south border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But that was ditched because there wasn't enough time. Well, the obvious answer is to go back to that proposal, now that we have unlimited time, and aim towards creating a customs frontier between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but without actual checks or infrastructure at the border. And the border already has a VAT border, and we don't have VAT checks at the border. There's an excise duty border. There's different levels of excise duty each side of the border, but we don't have checks at the border to police that. There's a security border. There's actually a people border. And usually you have checkpoints at a border to stop the people that are going across that shouldn't be going across. Well, we don't even have that. So it should not be too difficult to have a customs frontier without infrastructure in a north-south border.
So you think the border should be dividing the north and a north-south divide, as opposed to one in the Irish Sea? What would that mean for the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, that would restore the Good Friday Agreement, because what so offends the unionist community in Northern Ireland, and this is by far the most important thing, as one of your speakers was saying earlier, the collapse of the Good Friday Agreement is an absolute catastrophe. Political tensions are rising. There's nobody objecting in Northern Ireland to the border being in a different place, or there being different arrangements to deal with this issue. But it deeply, deeply offends the unionist community that this was imposed on them. It is a cardinal principle of the Act of Union of 1800, which binds Northern Ireland into the United Kingdom, is that there is one internal market for the United Kingdom. And now there is a customs frontier between the United Kingdom, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that separates Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. It also means that because the protocol puts the Northern Ireland into the EU single market and out of the UK internal market, EU law applies in Northern Ireland. So EU law applies in Northern Ireland like no other part of the United Kingdom, but the people in Northern Ireland have no say over those laws.
So there's lots of rumblings, backbench rumblings, and all sorts of threats of people resigning and goodness knows what else. The Prime Minister really could just turn to Labour to get this through, couldn't he?
Well, he could, and it was odd that Keir Starmer said, "Don't worry, we'll support you, whatever you sign." And not very statesmanlike to look at an agreement, to think about supporting something before you've even seen the text of the agreement. And also, it's very odd that the people who say, "Oh, just sign," they never mention the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is by far the most important factor here. The protocol was put in place to protect the Good Friday Agreement. Article 1 of the protocol is about protecting the Good Friday Agreement, but it's not protecting the Good Friday Agreement. It's undermining the Good Friday Agreement. So that surely is an invitation to perhaps get the Good Friday parties around the table again to say, look, how shall we sort this out? The EU has a very legitimate concern that they don't want non-compliant goods crossing from Northern Ireland into the EU single market. The protocol is not the only way of addressing that.
Okay.
We should be looking at a different protocol.
OK, but again, I make the point that Labour could get this over the line for the Prime Minister. Yeah. What would you do? Would you resign?
I don't think I'm not a minister, but the Prime Minister, I don't think will do that. I think the Prime Minister will want to talk to the Labour Party and say, look, the reason why I'm not signing this deal is because the Good Friday Agreement is by far the most important factor here. And it would be unconscionable to sign an agreement with the EU that cements in place the protocol, which is destroying the peace in Northern Ireland. And that's what it seems some people are urging the Prime Minister to do. I don't think he will do that.
You're not a minister, but you are a member of the Conservative Party when it comes to being an MP. You would continue to fight on, would you?
Well, I have many responsibilities in Parliament, and I take them very seriously. It gives a great deal of meaning to my life. I'm not about to pack it in, if that's what you're asking.
That's exactly what I was asking you.
Well, I'm carrying on. Thank you very much.
OK.
I hope you are.
I am, actually, for now. Let's see. Got a contract renewal coming up shortly. Let's see. It's hard work getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, believe me. Do you think we'll see a deal this week?
No, because the protocol itself is fundamentally incompatible. The protocol applies EU law in Northern Ireland, and there is no democracy. I mean, even there was a House of Lords subcommittee that is full of people who voted leave, voted remain, and they all unanimously said there is a democratic deficit that has to be addressed about the protocol. And the answer is to include Northern Ireland back in the internal markets of the United Kingdom, to make a new protocol attached to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is a permanent agreement. The protocol was only ever intended to be temporary. It's got its own clause about reviewing or superseding the protocol. It was meant to be a stopgap until there was a better solution. Well, we need a better solution now.
I always get confused about Boris Johnson saying that it was an oven-ready deal, and now he's saying he didn't really mean it and it was only temporary, etc., etc. And he's up to all sorts of mischief, isn't he, in the background?
Well, Boris Johnson, I think, did the best of a bad job on the basis that it's a temporary agreement and it can be superseded and improved. But the EU is at the moment refusing to contemplate that. I think if the EU reflects on the deteriorating security situation in Northern Ireland because of the collapse of power sharing and the undermining of the Good Friday Agreement, even they will come to the table eventually and realise that peace in Northern Ireland is the primary concern. And frankly, this is a storm in a teacup for the vast majority of other member states. They're not interested in having a row with the UK over this. This can be settled, but I don't think it can be settled if the existing protocol remains in place.
When do you think it'll be settled?
Well, I hope by the 25th anniversary. I mean, this is a very big moment. President Joe Biden is going to come over and celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It'll be an odd celebration if there's no power sharing, because that's the foundation. And bear in mind that the protocol itself was imposed on Northern Ireland. It didn't go through the Good Friday processes for consent from both communities. The Good Friday Agreement says no key decisions should be taken in Northern Ireland without the consent of both communities. Well, the protocol never had the consent of both communities. So it's a violation of itself of the principle of the Good Friday Agreement.
OK, it's good to talk to you, Sir Bernard, again. Sorry you're not with us. Hopefully we'll see you in the studio soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. In other news, child abuse image crimes have reached record levels, according to the NSPCC, and for the first time, virtual reality headsets are being used to view such material. Rachel Husmore.
Roxy was just 13 when a 17-year-old boy she'd never met coerced her into sending sexual images on Snapchat.
My whole life was about doing what he told me to do and hiding it from everybody. And then obviously the more photos he had, the more he had to blackmail me with, until eventually he asked me to send a video. Him and his friend, they just completely owned me at that point. Like I had absolutely no control.
She was just a child, and the impact was devastating.
The kind of shame really just buried me, and I ended up becoming very ill. I self-harmed a lot. I stopped sleeping, and eventually I was hospitalised because I ended up having a psychotic episode.
But Roxy is one of thousands. Last year, police recorded more than 30,000 offences involving obscene images of children in England and Wales, the highest number ever. Of the cases where a social media or gaming site was used to share the pictures, Snapchat was the most popular, followed by Meta's sites like Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp. And for the first time ever, virtual reality headsets were also used to view child abuse images.
this is an emerging threat. And that's one of the reasons why we have been pressing the government to commit to having a child safety advocacy body, because we think it's crucial to have a champion for children who can act as an early warning system.
A Snapchat spokesperson said any sexual abuse of children is abhorrent and illegal. Once aware of any sexual content exploiting minors, we immediately remove it, delete the account and report the offender. A Meta spokesperson said this horrific content is banned on our apps and we report instances of child sexual exploitation to authorities. Our work in this area is never done and we'll continue to do everything we can to keep the content off our apps.
I mean, I look so young. Also, why did anyone want a photo of somebody looking?
Roxy can't get her childhood back, but she hopes speaking out will protect other children from going through the horror that she did. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
And if you have been affected by anything in that report, please contact the Samaritans on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Look at the front of some of the morning papers for you. The Times leads with Putin abandoning Russia's arms control treaty with the US and a warning it could lead to nuclear weapons tests. The Guardian leads with the Royal College of Nursing suspending its planned strike action next week. Financial Times reports Rishi Sunak may be offering a 5% pay rise for people in the public sector to stop the wave of strikes. The Telegraph reports that next year's settlement could be 3.5% if the government gets its way. The Eye says the PM is ready to let MPs resign over attempts to block his new Brexit deal on Northern Ireland marriage. And the Daily Express says some shops are being forced to introduce rationing of fruit and vegetables after shortages. And many people on benefits will be worse off until 2025, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. The organisation has warned the annual uprating of benefits in April will merely take them back to around the real level they were at a year earlier due to a failure in payments keeping up with inflation. The Metropolitan Police have released new CCTV footage of a missing couple, Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple have been missing with their baby for more than 6 weeks. Police believe it's likely that they're running out of cash. The family of the American civil rights icon Malcolm X is planning to sue the FBI, the CIA and the NYPD for $100 million, accusing them of playing a role in his death. Alicia Shabazz says the agencies conspired to and executed their plan to assassinate her father in 1965. Shamima Begum, who was just 15 when she travelled to Syria to join the so-called Islamic State in 2015, is due to find out whether she's won an appeal against the decision to remove her British citizenship. Joined now by Steve Valdez-Simmons, the Refugee and Migrant Rights Director at Amnesty International. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. What do you think is going to happen later?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure.
She's not been very successful so far, has she?
She's been all the way through the courts up to the Supreme Court trying to fight this particular matter. The Supreme Court had found, in fact, that she was prejudiced in the appeal, but that it couldn't do anything to assist her in, at that time, allowing her to come back to properly be able to fight her claim to retain her British citizenship, which, as you say, has been stripped from her.
Why should she get it back?
Because she's British and it should never have been taken away in the first place. This country is responsible for its citizens, just as other countries are responsible for theirs. She is a Bethnal Green schoolgirl, born and raised in this country, lived here her entire life until lured to Syria, 15 years old. She is as British as I am, and this is where she belongs.
She could have been successful in taking the lives of many British people.
And if that had happened, then she should be investigated and perhaps prosecuted for it, just as any other British citizen, just as I would be if I had done something like that. Doesn't change the fact that she's a British person, been a British person throughout her life. This is where she belongs, and this country is responsible for her.
Even if she continues to be a threat to other British people?
Any British person who is a threat to other people, whether British or otherwise, is ultimately the responsibility of this nation, and this country should take responsibility for them. So, yes.
The then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, said, if we knew what he knew, most people in the United Kingdom would not want her back here?
Well, I don't think that's the proper question. The right question is this woman now, a girl when she was lured away, is she British or not? And the plain answer is yes. If the reverse was the situation, if some other country's national was on this territory thought to be dangerous, and this country, of whom she was not the UK, but some other country, said that they didn't want her as their citizen, so stranded her here, what would those who are clamouring for Shamima Begum to stay in Syria be saying? They would be calling for her to be expelled back to the country to which they would say she belongs. This young woman belongs to this country, and so we should accept that. And yes, if that means taking action in terms of criminal prosecution, etc., then if that's appropriate, that should be done. But it doesn't change that she's British.
There's a third, excuse me, a third-party country that she could go to, Bangladesh.
Well, that's a bit of nonsense, quite frankly.
Why?
I mean, well, I'll happily explain why.
Do.
Here she was, born in this country, never been to Bangladesh, did not have Bangladeshi citizenship. It is said that under the laws of Bangladesh, and I'm no expert on this, she has some claim, because through her parents, to Bangladesh nationality. Mm-hmm. Why is she any more Bangladeshi's responsibility than Syria? This is where she was born. This is where she did have citizenship. This is where she grew up as a schoolgirl. This is where she was lured from. It's not for this country to cast her off onto any other nation, Bangladesh, Syria, or anywhere else.
What other options does she have if she loses again today?
Well, if there were grounds to appeal, which would have to be on the basis of there being some error of law, and that would be about whether the laws that Parliament has passed and the powers that have been given to the Home Secretary lawfully entitle under our law the Home Secretary to do what has been done. I very much hope that our courts are able to find the injustice in this, whether directly under our law or under human rights law, and overturn this decision. But of course, that is a matter that our courts will decide.
And if they do find against her, she has no further appeal?
That will depend upon whether there are error of law grounds in the decision that's reached.
Okay, but she can't go to a higher court like the European Court of Justice? Or...
She could seek to go to the European Court of Justice, but she would have to exhaust her remedies in this country first, and the European Court of... Not the European Court of Justice, sorry. The European Court of Human Rights is where she
Forgive me, exactly that, yeah.
And that court would obviously first consider the rulings that had been given by the British courts to see whether there was some point of law raising human rights grounds that was questionably dealt with in our system. I personally think there would be good grounds for thinking that, given all the circumstances of this case. But again, that would be one for the judges.
OK. Interesting. Thank you very much indeed for explaining that to us this morning. Much appreciated, thank you. That will be at about 10 o'clock this morning is when we will hear the latest legal ruling as far as Shamima Begum is concerned. Will she once again be allowed to call herself British, or will she again, the government certainly don't want her back in the United Kingdom, will she find herself still remaining in Syria with little hope of ever returning back to the United Kingdom? That's, as I said, at 10 o'clock this morning.